Karen mocked the royal guard, called his horse a statue, and crossed the barricade to take a selfie. But one instinctive reaction from the horse and a single command from the guard turned her arrogance into a muddy public humiliation. Here's how it unfolded. Now, before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow at this very same time, we're dropping another powerful Royal Guard story that you won't want to miss. The pale morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Buckingham Palace as crowds of eager tourists gathered for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. A light breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sounds of London traffic, creating a perfect backdrop for what many considered the quintessential British experience. Visitors from across the globe huddled together along the barricades, cameras ready, their excited whispers creating a low hum of anticipation. Among the sea of respectful onlookers stood Guard Ellis Wells, his scarlet tunic a vibrant contrast against Defender's gleaming black coat. Both horse and rider stood in perfect ceremonial stillness, an impressive tableau of military discipline honed through years of rigorous training. Defender's ears occasionally twitched at the sounds around him, but his posture remained impeccable, a testament to the hours of specialized training that had prepared him not only for ceremonial duties, but for actual combat situations. The pair had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before their current posting, though few tourists admiring their ceremonial precision would guess at their battlefield experience. "For heaven's sake, is this all they do?" A sharp American accent cut through the respectful murmurs of the crowd. "I paid good money to see living mannequins and glorified statues with heartbeats." Karen Whitmore pushed her designer sunglasses to the top of her highlighted blonde hair, her expression a mixture of disappointment and disdain. Her Burberry trench coat and Louis Vuitton handbag marked her as someone accustomed to luxury, but the permanent frown lines etched around her mouth suggested that satisfaction rarely accompanied her expensive tastes. "Excuse me," she said, elbowing past a family who'd been patiently waiting for 30 minutes. "I need a better view than this." The father of the family stepped back reluctantly, his children's disappointed faces a stark contrast to Karen's look of entitled satisfaction as she claimed their spot. "Can you believe our tax dollars go to fund this charade?" Karen announced to nobody in particular, though her voice carried far enough that several British tourists turned with raised eyebrows. "Taxpayer-funded performance art, that's all this is? The ultimate tourist trap?" She checked her diamond-encrusted watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes, tapping her foot impatiently on the pavement. "When do they actually do something? This is worse than watching paint dry." A nearby tourist attempted to explain that the guards would change positions soon, but Karen cut him off with a dismissive wave. "I didn't come all this way to watch some man pretend he's furniture," she declared, rummaging in her handbag and pulling out her latest model smartphone. "These living statues are certainly not earning their keep. What's next? We pay people to pretend they're trees." Several tourists exchanged uncomfortable glances, shifting away from her as she continued her commentary at a volume that seemed deliberately calculated to carry to the guards themselves. "Move over," she demanded of an elderly couple who had been quietly admiring the scene. "I need to take some photos, and you're blocking the best angle." Karen positioned herself directly in front of the barricade, holding her phone at arm's length as she attempted to capture the perfect selfie with Guard Ellis Wells and Defender in the background. Her expression cycled through a series of practiced poses, pouty lips, exaggerated surprise, and finally an annoyed frown. "These guards are deliberately ruining my vacation photos," she complained loudly, reviewing the images with evident dissatisfaction. "Would it kill them to look at the camera? I've seen mannequins with more personality." She tried again, this time with a peace sign and exaggerated smile. After examining the results, she groaned in frustration. "Is this really what I woke up at 7 a.m. for? A photo with a man who's trying to impersonate a statue?" A small tour group had gathered nearby. their guide speaking in respectful tones about the history of the Queen's Guard. The household cavalry has defended the sovereign for over 3 centuries, the guide explained. Their ceremonial duties here represent just a small fraction of their military responsibilities. Oh, please, Karen interrupted, loud enough to disrupt the entire group. Obsolete institutions parading around like it's still the 1700s. You're all falling for these colonial relics. In America, we've moved on from this kind of pageantry. The tour guide paused, his professional smile tightening. The tourists in his group shifted uncomfortably, several of them British citizens who found Karen's commentary increasingly offensive. Anyway, the guide continued, the horses, like Defender there, undergo intensive training to stand still. Must be challenging, Karen scoffed. My goldfish mastered that skill on day 1. She turned her attention back to Defender, whistling sharply and making clicking sounds with her tongue. Hey, horsey, look over here. Don't you want to be in my photo? Defender's ear twitched almost imperceptibly, but the horse maintained its disciplined stance. Guard Ellis Wells remained equally motionless, his gaze fixed forward, the perfect image of ceremonial discipline. Unbelievable, Karen muttered. I've seen garden gnomes with more personality than these two. An older gentleman in a navy blazer, with military pins discreetly displayed on his lapel, approached Karen with measured steps. His posture and bearing immediately marked him as former military, though his gentle expression suggested he was attempting diplomacy. Excuse me, ma'am, he said quietly. These guards deserve our respect. Both the man and the horse have likely served in combat zones before this posting. Karen turned to him with an expression of theatrical exasperation. I didn't fly 4,000 miles to be lectured about some horse's feelings, she replied. If they want respect, they should acknowledge the people who pay their salaries. The veteran's expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes hardened. He nodded once and stepped back, recognizing the futility of the conversation. From the corner of the ceremony grounds, a uniformed security officer had noticed the disruption. He began making his way through the dense crowd, his progress slowed by the packed bodies of tourists trying to maintain their viewing positions. Karen, oblivious to the approaching security, continued her commentary. Do you think they drug these horses to keep them so still? There's no way this is natural. Nothing alive should be this rigid and boring. Karen's attention shifted suddenly to her designer handbag. With an exasperated sigh, she rummaged through its contents, eventually producing a packet of organic granola bars. She tore the wrapper open with her teeth, fragmenting pieces of the bar as she did so. Now, let's see if I can wake up this living statue, she announced to the increasingly uncomfortable tourists around her. Animals can't resist food. This'll get me my perfect shot. A middle-aged woman in a rain jacket frowned. You really shouldn't feed the horses, she cautioned. It's prohibited, and it could be dangerous for the animal. Oh, please, Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. It's just a granola bar, not poison. Besides, the poor thing is probably starving standing here all day. A father with 2 young children shook his head. Ma'am, those are working military horses. They follow strict diets and feeding schedules. Karen's only response was a dismissive flick of her wrist as she broke off a piece of the granola bar. The security guard was still making his way through the crowd, now more urgently as he noticed the food in Karen's hand, but the densely packed tourists slowed his progress. This is ridiculous, Karen muttered. All these rules for what? A horse is a horse. Without warning, she ducked under the barrier rope, stepping into the restricted area with a confident stride, as if the boundaries applied to everyone but her. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Several tourists called out warnings, while others began recording the scene on their phones, sensing the impending spectacle. Ma'am, return behind the barrier immediately. The security guard's voice carried across the courtyard, but Karen pretended not to hear, her attention fixed solely on Defender. Guard Ellis Wells remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed forward, his posture unchanged, despite the clear violation unfolding directly in front of him. Years of training had prepared him for precisely this type of disruption. maintaining ceremonial discipline while internally assessing threat levels and appropriate responses. Karen approached Defender with the granola piece extended in her palm, her phone ready in her other hand for the perfect shot. "Here, horsey," she cooed in a condescending tone. "Don't you want a little snack? Just look at my camera for 1 second." The crowd's tension was palpable now. Parents pulled their children back from the barrier, while others called out more urgent warnings. "Miss, stop! You can't do that! Someone stop her before she gets hurt. That's a trained military horse, not a petting zoo animal." A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mummy, why is that lady breaking the rules? Will the guard be angry?" The security guard had nearly reached the scene, pushing more forcefully through the crowd now, but Karen was already within arm's reach of Defender. The historically significant moment of the changing of the guard was now overshadowed by the spectacle of one tourist's brazen disregard for protocol and basic respect. Karen stood barely 2 feet from Defender now, granola bar fragment in her outstretched hand, phone positioned for the perfect selfie angle. The crowd held its collective breath, the regular hum of tourist conversation replaced by an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional click of cameras documenting the unfolding incident. "Just one perfect shot," Karen murmured, extending the granola bar toward Defender's muzzle while angling her phone for the ideal selfie. "Come on, horsey, just look this way. Step back from the horse immediately." The security officer's voice carried an urgent authority that Karen casually dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Oh, relax," she called over her shoulder. "I'm just getting one photo. All this ridiculous British theatrics over nothing." She sidled closer to Defender, determined to create her perfect Instagram moment, despite the chorus of warnings. Her red lacquered nails glinted in the morning sun as she held the granola fragment inches from the horse's mouth, her other hand stretching out with her phone. "Look at me, not through me," she complained to Defender, whose discipline remained unbroken despite the food temptation. "Fine, be difficult." In a moment of frustration, Karen reached up to physically turn Defender's head toward her camera. Her long manicured fingernail accidentally scraped against the sensitive skin of Defender's nostril as she attempted to reposition his face for her photo. The response was immediate. Defender's years of battlefield training had prepared him to remain calm under gunfire, explosions, and the chaos of combat zones. But the unexpected, sharp pain in one of his most sensitive areas triggered an instinctive response. He let out a sharp, startled neigh, his head jerking upward away from the unexpected pain. Though the movement was controlled and minimal compared to what an untrained horse might have done, it was enough to catch Karen entirely off guard. She stumbled backward, her designer heels failing to provide adequate stability on the ceremonial grounds. Her arms pinwheeled dramatically as she fought for balance, the phone flying from her grasp in a graceful arc. The crowd gasped as Karen landed ungracefully in a muddy patch left by morning dew, her Burberry coat splayed beneath her, Louis Vuitton bag tumbling to one side, and her phone clattering several feet away. The granola piece scattered into crumbs across the ceremonial grounds. Karen's reaction was instantaneous and extreme. Her scream could have been mistaken for someone suffering a far more severe injury than simple embarrassment. "The horse attacked me!" she shrieked, scrambling backward through the mud like a crab, smearing her designer outfit further. "Did you all see that? It tried to kill me!" Tourists watched in a mixture of shock and poorly concealed amusement. Several covered their mouths, whether hiding gasps or suppressing inappropriate laughter was impossible to tell. Phones recorded from every angle as Karen continued her dramatic display, her dignity completely abandoned as mud soaked through her expensive clothes. "I could have been trampled to death," she wailed, though Defender had barely moved from his position. "This is assault with a government animal." A child's voice cut through the commotion. "Mommy, the lady scared the horse, but the horse stayed still. She's the one who fell down." The simple clarity of the child's observations caused several nearby adults to nod in agreement, their sympathies clearly not with the mud-covered woman whose disregard for rules had led to her current predicament. Karen's phone lay face down in a shallow puddle, its screen now sporting a spiderweb of cracks visible even from a distance. Her carefully styled hair had come partially undone, and a smear of mascara tracked down one cheek from her watering eyes. Whether from genuine tears or theatrical effect was difficult to determine. "Someone help me!" she demanded, as if the crowd owed her assistance after witnessing her deliberate violation of clearly posted rules. "This is how you treat tourists? This monster attacked me!" In the tense moment following Defender's startled movement, guard Ellis Wells broke ceremonial stance. The action, though slight, was immediately noticeable to everyone who had been watching the famously immobile guards. His white-gloved hand moved to Defender's neck in a practiced, controlled motion, while his posture shifted subtly to a more functional position. "Defender, steady position," he commanded in a low, authoritative voice that carried just far enough for those nearest to hear. The military terminology and tone revealed a glimpse of the battlefield veteran behind the ceremonial uniform, a man who had led mounted patrols through war zones and navigated combat situations with this same horse. Defender immediately responded, settling back into perfect ceremonial stance. The entire interaction took less than 3 seconds, yet it demonstrated years of intensive training and the unbreakable bond between horse and rider. Ellis's hand briefly stroked Defender's neck once, the smallest acknowledgement of the horse's quick return to discipline, before returning to his ceremonial position. In that brief moment of broken protocol, onlookers caught a glimpse of Ellis Wells, the soldier, rather than the ceremonial guard. Alert eyes assessing the situation, the subtle shift in posture that combat veterans recognized as tactical readiness, the measured breathing of someone trained to remain calm under pressure. 2 security guards had finally pushed through the crowd and reached Karen, who remained sprawled dramatically in the mud. They helped her to her feet while she continued her stream of accusations. "That creature attacked me," she insisted, gesturing wildly at Defender, who had returned to perfect stillness. "And that soldier just stood there. Look at my clothes. This coat cost more than your monthly salary." Her once immaculate appearance was now a dishevelled mess. Mud caked the entire back of her designer coat, her carefully highlighted hair hung in damp strands, and her makeup had smeared across her flushed face. One security guard retrieved her cracked phone from the puddle, while the other attempted to escort her away from the restricted area. "This is negligence," Karen declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That untrained animal should be removed from duty, and that negligent soldier should be court-martialed for not controlling his horse." The crowd's reaction was immediate and unified. "The horse barely moved," called out an older woman with a Scottish accent. "We all saw you touch its nose," added a teenager who had been filming the entire incident. "You crossed the barrier after multiple warnings," stated the father who had cautioned her earlier. Ellis Wells had already returned to his ceremonial stance, his eyes fixed forward, his posture perfect once again. The only evidence that anything unusual had occurred was a barely perceptible alertness in Defender's stance. The military horse was still monitoring the situation while maintaining his disciplined position. The contrast could not have been more stark. Ellis Wells and Defender immediately returned to perfect duty despite the disruption, and Karen continuing her loud protestations while being escorted away, trailing mud and damaged dignity. "I demand to speak to whoever's in charge," Karen insisted, as the security guards firmly guided her beyond the ceremonial grounds. "Do you know who I am? This is assault by a government animal." A tall figure in a senior officer's uniform approached with purposeful strides. Captain James Thornton, head of the ceremonial guard detail, moved with the decisive efficiency of someone whose military career had spanned both battlefield command and the precision of palace duty. His appearance immediately brought a greater sense of authority to the scene. "I understand there's been an incident," he stated, his voice carrying the natural command presence that came from decades of military service. His attention turned first to Ellis Wells and Defender, assessing their condition with a quick professional glance before focusing on Karen, who was still loudly demanding compensation. "This vicious animal attacked me without provocation," Karen insisted, attempting to brush mud from her ruined coat. "I want whoever owns it held responsible." Captain Thornton's expression remained neutral, though something in his eyes hardened. "Ma'am, that animal is Sergeant Defender, a decorated military horse with 2 tours in Afghanistan. He's saved the lives of British soldiers under enemy fire and has been commended for exceptional service in combat zones." Karen blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by this information. "Furthermore," the captain continued, "Guard Ellis Wells is not merely a ceremonial figure, but an active duty soldier with battlefield experience. Both horse and rider have undergone thousands of hours of specialized training that allows them to maintain ceremonial discipline while being constantly alert to potential threats." The veteran who had approached Karen earlier stepped forward, his military bearing unmistakable despite his civilian clothes. "Captain, if I may, I witnessed the entire incident. This woman deliberately crossed the barrier despite multiple warnings, attempted to feed the horse unauthorized food, and then made physical contact with Sergeant Defender's face." Several tourists nodded in agreement, and a young woman held up her phone. "I have the whole thing on video, sir." Karen's expression shifted from indignation to uncertainty as she began to grasp the seriousness of the situation. "The Queen's Guard are not tourist props, Ms." The captain paused. "Whitmore," Karen supplied, her voice notably quieter. "Ms. Whitmore, these are active-duty military personnel performing an official function. Interfering with them isn't simply rude, it's a legal offence that carries significant penalties." The captain gestured toward Defender. "Military horses undergo more intensive training than most people can imagine. Defender has been conditioned to remain calm under gunfire, explosions, and battlefield chaos. His reaction to your touching his sensitive nostril was remarkably restrained. An untrained horse might have seriously injured you." Karen's face paled slightly as this reality sank in. "In fact," the captain continued, "Guard Wells' breaking protocol momentarily to steady Defender likely prevented a more serious incident. He was protecting both his mount and you, despite your disruption of his duties." The security guards had retrieved the incident report forms and were taking statements from witnesses. The veteran provided a detailed account, his military precision evident in the clarity of his observations. "The ceremonial stillness you mockingly referred to as playing statue is actually a combat-ready stance that allows immediate response to threats," the captain explained. "Just because they don't move doesn't mean they aren't constantly alert and ready for action." Karen's demeanour had transformed completely, the bluster and entitlement draining away as the legal and security personnel continued their professional handling of the situation. "These traditions aren't maintained out of blind adherence to the past, Ms. Whitmore. They represent functional disciplines that have proven their value on actual battlefields throughout history. The precision you witnessed before your disruption is the same precision that saves lives in combat zones." Karen Whitmore stood with uncharacteristic silence as the security officer finished writing up her citation. The fine amount caused her eyes to widen briefly, but she nodded in subdued acknowledgement, accepting the official document with none of her earlier bluster. "You're being issued an official warning and fine for interfering with the Queen's Guard," the officer explained professionally. "You should consider yourself fortunate that Guard Wells was able to control the situation so quickly. This could have resulted in much more serious consequences." Karen's gaze dropped to her mud-stained shoes, the reality of her actions finally seeming to register. "I didn't realize they were actual military personnel," she said quietly. "I thought it was just a show for tourists." "That's a common misconception," Captain Thornton stated, his tone professional rather than condescending. These men and horses represent the finest traditions of British military service, but they're not merely representing it, they're living it. Many will return to active overseas duty after their ceremonial posting. As Karen stepped away, attempting to salvage what dignity remained while navigating the mudstains on her designer outfit, the changing of the guard ceremony resumed its timeless precision. The disruption had barely registered in the grand choreography of the traditional event, the discipline of centuries absorbing the momentary chaos like a stone weathering a passing storm. The veteran who had witnessed the entire incident found himself surrounded by a small group of curious tourists, their questions now focused on the history and purpose of the Royal Guards, rather than merely their photogenic qualities. These horses and men trained together for years, he explained to an attentive family from Canada. The bond between them is built on absolute trust, the kind that can only come from depending on each other in life or death situations. Nearby, Guard Ellis Wells and Defender had resumed their ceremonial stance, their perfect stillness now viewed with newfound respect by the onlookers who had witnessed their brief but impressive display of actual military discipline. The morning sun gleamed off Defender's coat and the polished brass of Ellis's uniform, the timeless tableau restored to its proper dignity. As the ceremony proceeded, Karen slipped away through the crowd, her phone clutched in her hand despite its cracked screen, her attempts to clean the mud from her clothes only spreading the stains further. The theatrical indignation had been replaced by genuine embarrassment as she avoided the gazes of tourists who had witnessed her behaviour. In a moment of subtle military acknowledgement that most civilians would miss, Captain Thornton and the veteran exchanged a brief glance as they passed each other. The almost imperceptible nod between men who understood service and discipline beyond what could be explained to outsiders. No words were necessary in that exchange, just the mutual recognition of values that transcended generations and specific branches of service. The ceremonial changing continued with immaculate precision, each movement executed with the perfect timing that came from hundreds of hours of practice. Tourists watched with renewed appreciation, many now seeing beyond the colourful uniforms to recognise the actual military discipline and purpose underlying the tradition. Guard Wells and Defender remained at their post, their composure unshaken by the incident. To the untrained eye, they appeared exactly as they had before, living embodiments of a centuries-old tradition. But those who looked more carefully might notice the subtle alertness in Defender's stance and the vigilant readiness in Ellis's posture. Reminders that beneath the ceremonial exterior were a battle-ready soldier and warhorse, prepared to transition from ceremony to function in a heartbeat if duty required. What unfolded at Buckingham Palace that morning revealed a truth often lost in our camera-ready world. Traditions endure not because they resist change, but because they embody principles that remain relevant across generations. The ceremonial stillness of the Royal Guards isn't an antiquated performance frozen in time, but a living discipline that has evolved while maintaining its core purpose. In the contrast between Karen's loud entitlement and Guard Ellis Wells's quiet authority, we witness the difference between demanding respect and commanding it. One sought attention through disruption, the other earned it through disciplined service. The Guards' controlled response to provocation demonstrated that true authority never needs to announce itself. It is self-evident in action rather than declaration. Perhaps the most powerful lesson came in that brief moment when Ellis broke ceremonial stance to steady Defender. It wasn't just a trained response, but a reflection of values that transcend the ceremonial duties. The protection of his partner, the safety of the public, even a disrespectful member of it, and the immediate return to duty once the situation was stabilised. In that 3-second window, observers glimpsed the reality behind the pageantry. A soldier making split-second decisions based on years of training and a clear hierarchy of priorities. For many tourists that day, the Royal Guards transformed from photographic opportunities to representatives of something deeper: the discipline, commitment, and functional readiness that underpin ceremonial tradition. The uniform, the stance, the precisely timed movements all suddenly appeared not as theatrical elements, but as the visible expression of a continuing martial tradition that serves both symbolic and practical purposes. In an age where boundaries are often treated as suggestions rather than necessities, the incident served as a reminder that respect isn't just about politeness, but about recognizing the purpose and significance behind established protocols. The barriers at Buckingham Palace aren't arbitrary limitations, but necessary boundaries that protect both the public and the guards as they perform their duties. As the ceremony continued that morning, something subtle had shifted in how the witnesses perceived it. The spectacle remained the same, but the understanding had deepened. An appreciation that sometimes the most impressive displays of skill aren't in dramatic action, but in disciplined restraint. If you found this story of entitled behavior meeting military discipline enlightening, make sure to hit that like button to help more people discover these important lessons about respect and tradition. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about the Royal Guards and the consequences of disrespecting these elite military professionals. Hit the bell icon to be notified immediately when we upload our next video showing what happens when tourists cross the line with those who've sworn to protect the sovereign. Check out our other videos appearing on your screen right now to discover more fascinating encounters that teach valuable lessons about respect, tradition, and the unexpected consequences of entitlement. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Have you ever witnessed someone disrespecting important traditions while traveling? What happened as a result? What do you think about the guard's professional response in maintaining control of this situation while still performing his ceremonial duties? Remember, the discipline we witness in ceremonial guards isn't just for show. It's the visible manifestation of battlefield-tested training that deserves our respect rather than our entertainment. Until next time, mind the barriers, both physical and metaphorical, that maintain the dignity of our most treasured institutions.